We're going to start with Aarash. Tell me about your story. It's pretty amazing. It crosses continents.
Yeah, no, such a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Deb. It really it does. It's a story of being a victim of circumstance, if you will, and in the end, finding the light at the end of the tunnel. I was actually born in Texas. Both of my parents were students. They were from Iran, so I am Persian. And while they were students, they had me. Hence, I was born in Houston, Texas. Yay, Texas! I know. Yeah. Uh, But then a revolution happens in 1979 in Iran, and you had two young students who were my parents stuck in a totally unknown country to them, and they had to make a decision. Do we stay in the United States or do we go back to Iran? They really didn't have a choice. They had to stay in the US, but they were on student visas. They couldn't work, so they couldn't support me. I was a 6-month-old, and as you very well know, that takes a job and it takes money to raise a child. My grandparents, who happened to be in the United States at the time on a tourist visa, made a suggestion to my parents. Why don't you let us take him, being me, to Iran for a period of 6 months? Because I was a US born citizen, US passport. I could go back and forth as I please, but had my parents gone back, they couldn't have left. Why don't you let us take him to Iran while you guys get your visa situation in order and then summon him back and we'll bring him back to the United States? They really didn't have much of a choice, so they agreed. When I was 6 months old, I went to Iran with my grandparents. After getting to Iran a couple months later, all-out war breaks out between Iran and Iraq. My passport was taken away. I actually ended up not seeing my parents for 7 years. I was stuck in Iran. It wasn't just the fact that I was away from my parents that was the difficult part. That obviously was a major element to my life at the time. But there was a war going on. You know, we have this incredible luxury in this incredible country to never really have to deal with a war on your own soil. So there was one story in particular where I woke up probably around 2, 3 a.m. in the morning, and it sounded like the explosion of 1,000 fireworks go outside, 3 houses down, completely eviscerated. And there was a kid that I used to play with who lived in that house. So as a 6-year-old, you know, that really does shape your perspective on the world. You start to sort of realize.
It doesn't really get worse than that. I mean,
Yeah, you start to quickly realize that the world is not all candy canes and lemon drops as we are told as kids. But that was just leg one of the journey. Leg two was, well, we need to find a way back to the United States. Now, you got to understand, as a 6-year-old in Iran, all the movies come from the United States. All the music comes from the United States. And on top of it, add to the fact that they tell you your parents are in the United States. The United States was this Elysium fields that I just, in my mind, had to find my way back to. And I'll insert this just because of the fact that I work for one of the most iconic, if not the most iconic guitar brand in the world. I also loved Jimi Hendrix, and I loved Led Zeppelin, and I just loved all of the music that was created on these incredible instruments, not knowing that in the future I might actually end up there. We went on a journey. 19 different countries we went to, trying to find our way back to the United States. We would go camp out for weeks, waiting for the US consulate, the US embassy in various countries from India, Pakistan, Germany, Italy, to call our name, and we would go there and they would ask, where are you coming from? We would say, from Iran. Denied. Go all the way back to Iran. We did this 19 times over the course of a year and a half until we finally got a visa from Turkey, reinstated my passport, and I came back to the United States. But the fun just starts when you come to the United States. My parents by that time had moved to Maryland, a very rural part of Maryland at the time, and it was difficult. For a person from my background, English became a third language, just as a matter of circumstance. And for somebody from Iran, wasn't quite accepted in that community. I vividly remember growing up, I would be spit on. I would be told to go back to my country. And I couldn't figure out, well, where is my country? If I'm born in the United States and I belong here, why am I being told not to be in this country? I worked through it. I worked through it. My mother, who's very, very industrious, she told me, okay, the secret is we got to get you into private school, get you out of public school. It'll resolve all the problems. So I applied. I applied to a very prestigious private school in the DC metropolitan area. And my mother is persistent. You will not find a more persistent person than my mother. She keeps calling and calling and calling the admissions office until finally the admissions office says, "Ma'am, why don't you just come in? Let's have a discussion." She hangs up the phone, turns to me. I'm like 9, 10 years old. She says, "Let's go. This is it. You probably got in. They want to tell you in person." Okay. I got dressed. We went there. So just to paint the visuals for you, we walk in, we sit down, and it was walnut wooded walls with fox hunting pictures on the wall. I don't know who goes fox hunting in Maryland, but apparently it is a thing. And the headmaster came in. And the headmaster came in and basically went on this 20-minute diatribe regarding the history of the school, its lineage, its tutelage, a bunch of different idges. And finally turns to my mother and says, "Ma'am, your son is obviously intelligent. He would probably do fine here. However, his communication skills, his accent is entirely too difficult to understand. We can't let him come here." Now, at that moment in time, my mother, being an immigrant in this country, there's only so much that you can do or say. You kind of feel like you're the guest of the owner of the house, and there's only so much that you can really say. She didn't say anything. She stood up, she shook the headmaster's hand and said, "Thank you." And she walked out. We went in the car, she closed the door, and she started uncontrollably crying. Now, I didn't cry because I didn't want to make her upset. I waited until I got home. I'll take you to leg 2 of the journey. Trust me, this is going to get somewhere. Leg 2 of the journey, I ended up graduating from law school. I came out. Dream was to work for this firm that is based in Washington, D.C. area. And for me, it was like, this is it. I have to work in this firm. A friend of mine said, "Look, there is this recruiting event. Get yourself there. There's going to be a bunch of managing partners there, and you'll maybe run into somebody." Fantastic. So I went down to the Mayflower Hotel in D.C., and it was a recruiting session, and there was open bars all over the place, and about 70, 80 people, potential recruits, were there. And I was standing at the bar when I noticed one of the managing partners walk towards the bar. And I also noticed that he had been drinking. So I'm thinking, this is a great opportunity. I'm going to go in for the kill. I go up to him, and we start a conversation. About 5 minutes in the conversation, he turns to me and says, "So what are you doing here?" I said, "Well, this is an incredible firm. I love your international presence. International is my forte. It would be an honor. I would love to learn more and see how I can join the firm." He stops and he looks at me and he says, "Have you looked around the room?" And I said, "Yes." "You don't really fit the pedigree to be here, do you?" And I said, "What pedigree is that?" He said, "Just look around the room." And he walked off. I'll take you to the last leg of the journey. I came to Fender as an associate general counsel. At the time that I came to Fender, it was a completely different world. Our current CEO was not with the organization yet. Ownership was a completely different ownership. And an opportunity came up for me to apply for the general counsel role. So I decided not to throw my name in the hat. I said, "I'm not going to do that." Everybody around me said, no, you have to do this. You basically run this operations on a global scale. Just throw your name in the hat. I said, "They're not going to give me this position. This is Fender. This is one of the most iconic American brands in the history of not only music history, but in American history. It's just not going to happen." They're like, "Well, if you don't throw your name in the hat, we're going to throw your name in the hat." Fine, throw the name in the hat. And I distinctly remember interviewing with one of the owners of the organization that's no longer there. And during the interview, he refused to shake my hand. And then after I sat down, about 10, 15 minutes into it, I was abruptly cut short, and I was told that you don't really fit the look or the type of a general counsel. Now, at that moment in time, something within me said, don't react emotionally. Control. What this person is saying is coming from a place of ignorance, not hatred. They're cousins, but they're a little different. How do you overcome ignorance? You overcome ignorance through education. And I channeled my mother, the way that she actually dealt with that headmaster. She simply stood up and shook his hand. I simply stood up, and I attempted to shake his hand. He didn't shake my hand. And I said, "Thank you for the opportunity." I went up into my office, and I closed the door. And I said, the next time that I walk down into that office, I'm going to become the general counsel of this company. The next time that I went down into that office, I became the general counsel of this company.
Bang.
Thank you. I not only became the general counsel of the company, I became the youngest to be promoted in their 76-year history from vice president to senior vice president to executive vice president. And they even called me up one day and said, we want you to be the president of our foundation. We want you to run that. I was the first one in Fender's history to hire the first female attorney in 76 years. The first African-American attorney, Asian-American attorney, Native American attorney, LGBTQ, veteran, disabled. Completely changed the demographics there. And of the 600 lawyers that I work with around the world, we changed that demographic as well. It had to be more representative of the people that we sell products to. What I learned, Debbie, throughout this process and why I welcome the opportunity to speak on this stage is, I learned a very important lesson. Your perceived weaknesses can many times be your greatest strengths. For the longest time, I went by the name Alex. I went by the name Ross. I don't even know where that came from. I went by a lot of different names because I thought that I had to be a white male in order to succeed in my profession. And I consistently failed, and I swam in the sea of mediocrity for years and years and years until I said, you know what? No more. I'm going to be who I am. My name is Aarash Darroodi. I come from a 2,500-year-old culture. There's been a lot of learnings that have been passed down to me generation after generation. I'm going to try to be me. Let's try this guy for a change. That's when I tapped into some immense potential that I never knew was possible, but it was always there. Your perceived weaknesses can be your greatest strengths.
I think that is a great life lesson that I know that I have struggled with during my life, and I think it's great to hear how you've overcome. What about you, Aarash? When you were in those situations where people were saying, look around the room, do you see anybody who looks like you here? How do you get to the point where you can be like, well, but there's me now, and let's get more of us in here?
I think it's really part of the American story, right? What's interesting is I learned this later on, going back to what you said. You know, when you read about history, Gangs of New York. If you ever see that movie, the Irish were not treated very well when they first came to the United States, and then later on, when the Italians came from Europe, came from Italy to the United States, they weren't actually treated that well either. I think it's just a part of the American story, if you will. For me, it is, I think, Cam, you touch on this as well. It's about paving the path whereby other individuals that maybe perhaps are of my background or of unfamiliar backgrounds, perhaps it's a little bit easier for them when that time comes. The pioneers always get the arrows. Somebody has to go through, somebody has to pave the path. It's just, it is what it is. But it's bigger than you. I think for me, it's bigger than me. For me, I'm not vanity is of no significance to me whatsoever. Sitting in this position with this incredible company, it's a representation of the possibility that if you open up your lens and your aperture to people from different backgrounds, they may actually be quite helpful to you.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I only hire underdogs. I only hire people who have chips on their shoulders. That's purposely done that way. And again, if you walk through my department, it is a representation of the United Nations. As far as I'm concerned, we have all sorts of backgrounds there. But when you give the opportunity to people who have gone through difficulty in their lives, I want to know what the difficulty is, how you overcame it, and what you learned from it. Because unfortunately, in this world, you only get stronger through challenges. You only get stronger through obstacles. I want those people. And when they get their opportunity, hopefully they can do what I do, is open up the doors for other individuals. And when you stand back after a couple of years, you realize, oh, wow, I made some significant changes, not only in the lives of these individuals, but a significant change in the lives of the people that surround them that never thought that they could actually get value from people from this background or with that unusual name with a whole bunch of vowels, successive vowels and such. Yeah.
I love the power of the underdog. I'm all 100% here for that.
Yeah, and I also think that to find happiness is obviously a pursuit that every human being sort of goes after. But I think you need a cause. You need something bigger than you, something that you're fighting towards, that's just not for personal gain, but it's for the gain of a lot more people than you. You know, growing up as an Iranian in this country, the most difficult thing that ever happened for every Iranian or Persian, whatever nomenclature you want to utilize, was the hostage crisis in the 1980s. We've had to overcome that negative shadow that's hung over each and every single one of us. For me, it's incredible that in today's day and age, an Iranian is a person who's responsible for protecting the brand that basically is responsible for saving the history and the art of Buddy Holly, Jimi Hendrix, Muddy Waters. An Iranian is doing that. So it's bigger than you. And when you think about it that way, and yes, there are times it gets very hard, very, very hard. But when you stand back and say, no, this is bigger than me, I think I need to just continue going forward. Just keep going. Just keep going.
It was just a quick question. Hi, I'm John. I'm a production student from OU, Ohio University. I just wanted to get more clarification because I think you, Aarash, you brought up strengths being your or weaknesses being your greatest strengths, and I think I've heard that before, but I'm not exactly sure how to incorporate that. Like, if you could give more insight on what you mean.
Absolutely. Like I said, the example for me personally was in my world, in my industry, it was primarily the fact that you have to be, I thought you had to be white male with an anglicized name to be successful. Why? Because everybody else around me was white male with an anglicized name that was successful. But we ran into issues within the organization. We ran into international issues. And the issue that we ran into was in Mexico, because that's our second largest manufacturing facilities in Mexico. All of those gentlemen around me that I was aspiring to be, they couldn't resolve the issue. I was able to resolve it. I resolved it because I'm very international. I spent probably 10 years of my life living in 19 different countries. That gives you a different perspective on things. And issue couldn't be resolved, and I told the board of directors and I told the C-suite, I said, let me go down there. Let me go down to Mexico. I'll resolve this situation. And they all looked at me as if I had horns coming out of my ear. I went down to Mexico. I went down to the government office. I met with the individual. We did the Mexican kiss on the cheeks. Why? Because I know Mexican culture is similar to European culture, which is similar to Iranian culture, and the kiss on the cheeks, people lower their defense mechanisms. I resolved the problem that nobody else could. I realized that actually that perceived weakness, that I had to be a white male and I'm not, and I will never be able to be a white male, that actually was my greatest strength.
So in general terms, you would say like just upholding authenticity in whatever you do.
100%, absolutely.
I agree with that. I'm team authenticity.